Welcome to another episode of the Tech Vault with Mitchell Sellers. Today we're going to be talking about managing GitHub Copilot costs. Now that we are around almost a full month into the new billing cycle with GitHub, thought I'd take some time to step back in and share what I've been able to see with everything that's new. I know that everybody was scared about the cost model. There's all kinds of things that have been going around. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time today just to show a few of the things that I've seen, ways that I've been able to manage our costs a little bit better, things that you can do within your organizations to either monitor, control, or at minimum, potentially restrict or limit your costs so you don't get any unexpected crazy bills at the end of the month. Things are constantly changing. I'm recording this on June 24th. It just so happened that a couple of changes and things I'm going to show you today have been deployed out on GitHub just over the course of the last couple of days. So it is very possible that you'll continue to have even more greater tools along the way here for a little bit longer. So it is definitely interesting to see how some of the stuff is going to come together, things that you might end up needing to do within your organization. So um, please keep an eye out on all of those kinds of things. You may end up being able to see more or less or slightly different data within your individual organizations as you get along. So at the highest level, what I really kind of want to talk about are a couple of the things that you can do or the ways that you can do things to really monitor and or train your teams on doing different things. And broke things out into a couple of different sections here, but it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure scenario depending on exactly which ways you interact with Copilot. For myself, I happen to interact with it more often with the cloud agent, actually assigning tasks to Copilot from GitHub and letting it work on things out there, and then I do the review after. When you do that, a few of the things that we're going to talk about here, for example, the Chronicle command within the CLI doesn't really work as well to be able to do any type of analysis reporting or tip sharing. So some things will be a little bit more applicable to one person versus another, depending on what you're doing. I wanted to kind of start out here with smart model selection. I think this is one of the biggest things that I'm seeing when I work with development teams and work with them to understand, what it is that they need to do or how they need to go about doing things. And so one of the things that we see right now is as you go through and we're using token-based usage within Copilot now, it is really important to understand that our pricing tables per 1 million tokens used are based on the particular model in which you use. And one of the biggest things here is it is absolutely exponential, right? The difference in the cost of the models that you're using. So utilizing a overly powerful model for a task that doesn't require that level of skill is going to have a substantial impact on the costs that you spend. For example, 1 million tokens for input on GPT-5 Mini is only 25 cents and output is $2. However, if you go down here to GPT-5.5, we're looking at a $10 per million input token and $45 cost for the individual output tokens. So when we take a look at that from a costing perspective, right, the output tokens are 22, almost 23 times more expensive to utilize. The input tokens are 40 times more expensive. So it's great. We have these tools available, but we want to make sure that we're being smart with what we send to the various models, why we send it, where we send it, how we send it. So, what are some of the things that we can do to be smart? Well, one of the things that we can do is understand the tasks and things that we're looking to do and make those decisions ourselves. If we're working within Visual Studio, we can use Visual Studio to pick the right model that we're looking for. If we know we're doing something that we can do, you know, effectively with Haiku rather than using Opus 4.7 or Opus 4.8, great. Utilize that. Make that change yourself. The other thing that you can do is if you go and take an issue, for example, and you want to add or assign something to uh, the Copilot agent, right? So when I go and do my assigned agent here, you'll see here that I have the ability, right, to select my branch. I've got my agent. I can do custom agents if I need to. But then over here, this is where you can get yourself into some fairly complex problems, and you can, work with this and say, okay, I want to use auto. I have had really good success in using this interaction mode where I'm assigning an actual issue that has detail, that provides some context for the individual agent. I've had pretty good luck with that working and doing the things that we want it to do. And that will help you kind of manage some of those costs and different things along the way. Um, is it perfect? Maybe not, but it's definitely going to give you a little bit better control, letting it kind of make some of those decisions for you. Definitely something to consider as you're going out and assigning tasks. When you're going through and doing that, it's also then important to figure out how do we actually monitor what's going on. And this is part of the changes I mentioned that have been very, very recent within GitHub. If you're a command line user, you can use the Chronicle command, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And the CLI shows you things a little bit more. But there's a couple of things that we can do. If we've assigned via agent mode a task, we can go out and take a look at the individual sessions now that were done in Copilot. So I can come out to my pull request that was done. Copilot started the work. I can view the session. Now, this is where we've always been able to view the session. We've been able to steer it. We've been able to kind of see what's going on. And one of the things that we can see here is, okay, we used 132.2 AI credits, so $1.32 in usage. Now, what's really cool with this one is this was a full-on new feature add. This was creating a admin screen, a detail screen, an edit behavior, and everything. And what you can see here is we do see some things where it is doing some searching in the code. We gave it some context of exactly what we wanted, but I just gave it the actual path. I didn't give it anything to like capture that context or be anything else. But it was fairly efficient for the most part until it started to having to do a little bit more finding and searching. We could tighten this up a little bit more by giving it even more context and more detail along the way. But we can quickly and easily look at the usage now for individual sessions. We can see the model that was used and the processes that were utilized right here, which is really, really nice. We can also do things like open it up in Visual Studio Code and those kinds of things to be able to potentially further interact with this coding session if we need to. And so one of the things that we can, do is be able to use this to guide us. We also, within the billing processes of GitHub, we have the ability to go out and look at things as well. And so in this case, I'm looking at an account where I have just myself in here. So we can see that I'm doing pretty good. I've not used a crazy amount yet. We can see the default grouping by coding agent models. And what's really nice is they differentiate between auto and it's selecting a particular model and you manually selecting it. So in this case, this usage and this usage was done automatically. This usage is something that was done by me personally, whether it be a CLI within Visual Studio or otherwise. but I selected this item. And then we have the code review model, and then they do have this kind of all other bucket. Doesn't necessarily come together a lot. But then you can see the breakdown of where your spending is and those kinds of things. And you can see here that a lot of my spending is in that overall coding agent model, the orchestrator, the online iterative. If I wanted to reduce my costs, I could do some of this stuff via the CLI, give it a little bit tighter context, and do things like that, which would then drop down some of the credits that were used for that coding agent itself. One thing that's really important here, this is not a real-time report, but this is a fairly close to real-time report. So if you are experimenting with some new things and you want to be able to look at, overall usage, maybe you did a little bit with CLI, a little bit with Visual Studio, and then assigned a lot of it to Copilot to do via the web, you can come back and refresh this page, and you'll see here, like, so 2248. I think I have a little bit more usage that maybe happened since I loaded this page. Yeah, so we have 2279. So we are able to do a little bit of kind of point in time comparison just by running this report and taking a look at it. You can do a little bit of management of users by products, organizations, cost centers, etc. In my case rate, I'm looking at just one user, so made it a little bit easier. This gives you that accountability, that review, that audit, right? That's where we can start to monitor some of the things that are going on. Now, the next piece of this, right, is how do we control ourselves? How do we make sure that we don't get ourselves into a situation where we get a crazy bill at the end of the month, right? In my case here, I have 7 days to use another 12,000 credit, almost 12,000 credits. I'm probably going to be okay. But budgets and alerts is where all of this lives from enterprise perspective. It's a little bit different if you're not on an enterprise account, but the idea here is you have all AI credit SKUs. So any of the budgets that you set, those are going to be set for all of the AI credit scenarios. So this covers all of the models, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can see here, I have an enterprise for my enterprise budget set at $50 budget with a stop usage set to yes. So what this means is that with this being the only rule that I have out here, I am going to, once I hit $50 of overage, I'm going to basically stop Copilot from working for anybody, right? All of the AI credits are going to stop working. Included usage alerts, if we turn those on, it does make sure that you get, notifications as you get close to those kinds of things, which is really nice. If you have no budget set, it is going to be unlimited. And that's the really dangerous part for folks, is if you leave it unlimited and the developer goes rogue, they're able to do it. One of the biggest things people have been asking me is how do I limit, by region, by development team, by user, or otherwise? Well, what we can do here is we can do an AI credits budget. And then when we get into creating this budget, there's a number of different things we can do. We can do it at the enterprise level. If you're an enterprise user, you can do it at the organization level, right? The individual org within a enterprise. You can also do a cost center budget. You need to make sure that you have a cost center included. So the cost centers, allow you to kind of group people together. Cost centers, as you define them here, just to give a little bit of insight on the cost center process, is a way, right, that you can create and group from a billing perspective different types of things. So you can actually group organizations, you can group repositories, and or you can group individual users within your organization to be able to kind of manage those them together. So you could put your 3 senior developers together in one cost center. You could put your junior development team in a different cost center to be able to set different budgets and alerts for those particular resources. It's a great way if you're working with a team and you're wanting to manage a budget from a team perspective. The other thing that you can now do from a cost management perspective is leverage a individual user budget. So one of the things that you can do here is for an individual user, you can go in and I can say, hey, for me, I want to do this. Now, note, this is a single select list. This is not a multi-select list. So I can, by user, set a scope. What's nice with this is if you have one user that really needs to either be constrained to not go over, or if they need to kind of get, let them spend more than others, this definitely helps be able to kind of put them into a crowd bucket. Now, the biggest thing that you want to remember is that the usage is pooled overall on the AI credit side of things. So you do have a little bit of like, when do they hit that limit is something that you want to take care of, that kind of thing. And it is also important to note that if you do it in the middle of a billing cycle, the usage before a budget creation is not counted for the current budget cycle. So if you all of a sudden start to create a $50 limit for somebody, but they've already used $50 or they've used $45, that's not going to be there. They're going to get essentially $50 more of budget if you do that. So definitely some controls in place here. Individual organizations are really going to need to sit down and think about how they want to manage their teams, how they want to coordinate things, how they want to really entice and bring everything together in a little bit, a little bit tighter fashion. But by doing those kinds of things, we're going to be able to make things a little bit easier to limit and understand. Now, as we move forward then into how else can we limit our token cost? How can we limit the amount of time that it takes for things to process? What can we do to be able to make our AI usage a little bit more effective? Well, one of the things that we've found, right, is that you limit the scope. If you are using the command line, using an at include to say, work with this file, that prevents the AI tools from having to search your code base. It prevents them going out and trying to learn all of the things that they need to learn about your code base. The other thing is that a more detailed, work item. Again, I mentioned I use the coding agent a lot, right? So having a good user story, having something that came in from a product person that has some details, and providing hints. For example, inside of here, this is going to point it to the right file rather than it having to figure out like, oh, add this to the menu. Where is the menu? What is the menu, right? It's going to do a lot more work if you do that. So by doing little hints, little nuggets, little instructions on an item by item basis can make things a lot easier. The other thing is if you have any particular rules, things that you have to do, those are the kinds of things that become really important. Now, that is great when I have a very specific task with a very specific thing. We can also use plan mode from the CLI. And that allows you to kind of create a little bit more of an AI friendly plan of exactly how to do this. And then you can kick the task over. The other thing that becomes really important is within your GitHub repository, it is possible to have a GitHub Copilot-instructions.md. These are areas where you can do things to let Copilot know, hey, here's some things that are really helpful. For example, it uses Entity Framework, Hangfire for background jobs. It uses a front end system, but you're never making adjustments to this as part of an interaction. Always reference these instructions, fallback, right? So at the end of the day, we're able to say, hey, this is what we want to do. Here's how the application runs. Here's how we do validation steps. Here's how we do things for database. Here's our development workflow. I want you to make the code changes, build the projects, run the tests. Here's important locations. Where are things? Where can I find things? What is the purpose of each of the solution files within our project? Key files to monitor. Where do I go look at things? What things are generated automatically from a build perspective? What are some of the common issues? What are the expectations for performance? By setting some of these baseline things, these always go along with your individual tasks. So Copilot doesn't have to spend as much time continually reviewing or thinking about what it's doing or answering the same question over and over again, right? If it went through the effort, why don't we document it so that it doesn't have to go back and search your code base with every single thing you do? It may not be a huge expense, right? But if you're consuming an extra 50 credits or something like that with each individual request, right, we can do some pretty good micro optimizations. You can also, as part of that same concept, do a Copilot setup steps specific workflow. This specific workflow here allows you to say, here's all the things that you need to do to be able to just run with this project. So in this case, this is a Blazor interactive server project. It's a pretty simple one, but basically we check out the code, we set up and ensure .NET 10 is there, we cache our NuGet packages, we do a restore, and we ensure that .NET EF is here in the command line. This makes it really easy. This ensures that the job runner always has the things that it needs. This saves some of that cycle time, again, every single time you ask it to spin up a task and do something for you. The other thing that you can do within your individual repositories and at organization and other levels is enable the preview memory feature. GitHub Copilot Memory is nothing more than a way for a repository and GitHub to essentially cache things that it understands as being important. These are things that you as a developer, I can't edit this. I can't edit the understanding. I can't, do anything. But what I can do is I can see, well, what did it find important? And this is an interesting one, right? So this says here, GitHub Actions in this repo generate pinned to a full commit SHA, often with a version comment instead of using floating tags like v4. Gosh, that sure sounds like an instruction, right? Something that I could put in place. And so this was done by the code review agent to make sure that it was doing things appropriately. But over time, some of these things can be important for you to include into your own documentation because you can do individual folder or file level details for the Copilot instructions. It's also important that if you see Copilot doing the same thing consistently but in a weird manner, it's always good to come in here to Copilot memory and see if there's a memory point in here that is, maybe telling it to do something that you didn't expect it to do. Again, you don't have a lot of visibility right now into what these items are, but they definitely provide some better improvements in overall quality of Copilot solutions because it is able to learn from past mistakes, from past feedback, from past tasks to then avoid some of that repetition going forward. So a lot of that, you have that control. Sometimes it's worth it, right? Sometimes it's worth it to just give a vague request because you don't know what you want to do. That's when things like using plan mode and ask mode and things like that become a little bit easier. But the general idea is that the more you limit the scope in your usage, the better off you're going to be in being able to keep that token usage down, make things a little bit more affordable, and move things along nicely. Now, one of the other things that you can do if you are a CLI command user. If you're not a CLI command user, these commands don't necessarily work the greatest for you, but the Chronicle command is something that is really kind of cool if you are a CLI user or a GitHub app user because it's essentially using CLI as well. But the Chronicle commands allow you to basically go to Copilot and say, hey, what kinds of things could I do? And it will come back and say that, like, hey, you did some pretty cool stuff, but you've given some really short prompts. You should use the plan feature beforehand. This helps you do things cheap, cheaper, right? Rather than using the coding agent. And the idea behind this is that the more detail that I can give the coding agent of an executable plan, the faster that agent's going to be able to complete, right? Low cost model in the CLI, high cost model at the coding agent. They also talk about naming things, they talk about scoping things, they talk about looking at memory, which is what we were just talking about, and some other things. Those of you that utilize Copilot CLI more for your day-to-day tasks. I strongly, strongly recommend. Go to, from the CLI, it is Chronicle, and then inside of Chronicle, you can go with tips, cost tips, improve. These are really the three big commands to be able to get some of that insight. You are going to get different experiences and different data depending on your usage pattern and what you're doing within Copilot, especially if you are a heavy CLI user. For those of us that have been very heavy users on the web side of things, I think this is a great time and place to start thinking about maybe we need to start doing a little bit more in the CLI to do some of that pre-work. I'm seeing that if you do, the plan process via CLI and then do the actual implementation via web. So plan, create your work item, assign the work item in the web. I am seeing a reduction of about 20 to 25% in the overall AI credit usage. My only limit right now is that some of these really complex tasks that I'm assigning are only taking around 300 AI credits to accomplish or less, which means it's $3. The end of the day, I can do it quickly, easily, and obtain the same quality that I'm looking for at $3. It's probably not worth a micro optimization to save 60 cents or something like that on that individual task, depending on how many of those that I'm doing. But these are some of those tools that allow you to kind of dig into your past history, the things that you've been able to, do in the past and what kinds of costs might be associated with those. So as we look forward, we are definitely in a place where things are changing, right? New models are coming and going, right? We had Fable for, I think, 3 days. We will be continuing to see different things. If you don't have it today, the real action plan, I think, for anybody that might be watching, make sure that you review what you have today. Make sure you have budgets in place. Make sure you have the alerts turned on. Sit down with your teams, train your teams, show them how to limit scopes, show them how to get the visibility into some of their things. You may need to run reports for them. You may need to be able to give them more information, because the one limitation from a user perspective, when you're, especially if you're inside of a um, you know enterprise or other organization, is you don't always have abilities to see that higher level report of what they're doing. So sit down with your team, review, look. If you have one person spending more than another, take that time to see what they're doing. Ask them. You may not be able to get it from the reporting that's available in GitHub. So sit down with the dev teams, ask the dev team what they're doing, how they're doing things. Why, if you have somebody that's using a lot more, ask them what they're doing, ask them how you might be able to help them out. But it's incredibly important here, especially when there is no real right or wrong that's going on here, right? Even if you look at the documentation that's provided by GitHub, if you look at some of the things that if you ask Copilot how to do things, you're going to get different answers. We are in a world of a moving target. Take that into consideration as you're training your teams. I really, really think that we're in a great place with all things AI. It's continuing to improve and get better. But at the same time, right, we have a lot more work that may need to be able to be done in the future. If you like this video, if you have tips and tricks that you've learned, share them. I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, it has been great having you again with the Tech Vault, and we'll be recording again soon. Thanks.